Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 18, 2024. President Joe Biden takes executive action on immigration, allowing hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens to apply for permanent residence and eventual citizenship without having to leave the country. Plus, new regulations to allow certain DACA beneficiaries, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and other young immigrants to more easily qualify for work visas. Coming up, we'll hear from the president and Republican senators and talk about it with Washington Post immigration reporter Maria Sacchetti. Boeing CEO David Calhoun apologizes at a Senate hearing to the families of victims of two 737 MAX plane crashes and is questioned by senators about new whistleblowers who say Boeing intentionally hid faulty airplane parts from regulators. Senate Democrats try to bring up and pass a bill to ban bump stocks, the devices that can make semiautomatic rifles fire rapidly, but they're blocked by Republicans. Last week, the Supreme Court struck down a federal prohibition on bump stocks that was based on a law making machine guns illegal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he received assurances from U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that the U.S. will unlock weapon shipments to Israel that the Biden administration has held up. We'll hear from both of them. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg speaks about Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea to thank its leader Kim Jong-un for supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine. And U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, introduces a bill to require technology companies to remove deepfake artificial intelligence pornographic images after another Senator, Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, tried and failed to get a bill on this subject passed last week. It would allow victims to sue. An article at the Washington Post begins, President Biden will clear the way on Tuesday for hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants married to U.S. citizens to apply for legal residency in one of the most expansive immigration programs of his presidency. Joining us now on the phone is the reporter who covers immigration for the Post, who wrote that story, Maria Sacchetti. Thank you so much for being with us. What's being announced?
Well, President Biden is allowing undocumented immigrants who are married to U.S. citizens to more easily get on a path to U.S. citizenship. Instead of having to leave the country or being subject to bars, which could force them to stay outside the country for as long as 10 years, they'll be able to, waive those penalties for being here illegally, and they'll be able to apply for citizenship. First they have to become permanent residents, and then after about 3 years, they could apply for citizenship.
It was just a couple of weeks ago that President Biden made an announcement about border security, closing down illegal entry between ports on the U.S.-Mexico border, and now this. How do the two fit together?
Well, I think for his critics, they don't exactly. I mean, he's cracking down on new arrivals, but he's offering some benefits to people who also may have crossed the border illegally. But it's what's complex about it is that many of the people who could benefit, from this latest program are people who arrived as children. So they didn't make the choice. They were brought here by their parents, and now they're in this limbo. But the other thing is that the United States Congress, really prioritizes family unity. If you're a U.S. citizen, you have a right to sponsor your immigrant spouse for permanent residency and citizenship, and the argument is you're an American and you have the right to choose your spouse and live with them in this country, and that's what the president is speaking to, and most of the folks who are going to probably benefit from this are from Mexico, which is the largest. Mexican Americans are the largest Latino group in the country by far, and most of them are U.S. citizens.
The president also marking the 12th anniversary of the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What's the status of that? I understand there's a change also being made today by the president on that.
Well, that's what a lot of folks are saying. Today, this is a poignant moment. And what Biden is doing recalls what President Obama did in 2012 when he had the surprise announcement in the Rose Garden that he would give Dreamers work permits. It was an extraordinary transformation for 800,000 people who couldn't get driver's licenses or go to college or all those things, and suddenly the United States was open to them. But the Trump administration showed that could change quickly. He tried to end DACA, as it's known by its initials, and now the program is frozen, so that there are probably more young people graduating from high school and college now who are not eligible for DACA than those who benefit from it right now. And that is an extraordinary shift. I mean, I think a lot of people assume that President Obama took care of the situation, but what he and now Trump have done is create kind of a bubble of people who have work permits but are under the constant threat of having to lose them depending on what the courts decide.
The announcements made today, the president has the authority to do it on his own, or can Congress get involved?
The president does have the authority to do it on his own. This is something that after DACA, Republicans filed a lawsuit trying to end DACA, and that's why the program's frozen right now to existing recipients. And Democrats have learned from that experience, and they're, instead of relying on policies that aren't founded in law, like the DACA program, they're relying on authorities such as parole, which has a long history in U.S. law, and so it certainly can be challenged in courts. But so far, it's withstood those legal challenges. The president has the authority to parole in people, to waive them into the United States, and Biden's used it more than any other president.
Maria Sacchetti, Washington Post reporter covering immigration issues. You can find her story at WashingtonPost.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And some of President Biden's announcement today at the White House.
A few days ago, we marked the 12th anniversary of taking care of Dreamers that President Obama and I put in place. There are a few of these immigration areas that have had most positive impact and gotten more support from the American people across the board. These young people known as Dreamers, Hispanics, South Asians, and more, who came to America as children, only know America as their home, have been able to live and learn out of the shadows. So many of them have graduated from high school and college and are starting families on their own, building successful careers, serving our nation in uniform, and so much more. We're a much better and stronger nation because of Dreamers, like Javier, who just introduced me. So today I'm announcing new measures to clarify and speed up work visas to help people, including Dreamers, who have graduated from U.S. colleges and universities, landed jobs in high-demand, high-skilled professions that we need to have grow to see our economy grow. It's the right thing to do. I want those who've been educated at U.S. college and universities to put their skills and knowledge to work for here in America. I want to keep building the strongest economy in the world with the best workforce in the world. We've already created 15 million new jobs, a record. We're seeing record economic growth, a record of small business growth. And I doubt why the action we're taking today matters. If you wonder about that, just ask business leaders, ask labor leaders, ask economists, ask elected officials. They know it's good for American business. They know it's good for the American economy. They know it's good for America, period. This step builds on other actions we've taken to support Dreamers, from defending Dreamers in the courts and expanding access to health care for millions of Americans under the Affordable Care Act, including for Dreamers. The second action I'm announcing today is about keeping families together. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, family's about the beginning, middle, and the end. About keeping couples together who are married, where one spouse is a U.S. citizen, the other is undocumented. They've been living in the United States for at least 10 years. These couples have been raising families, sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. Matter of fact, the average time they've spent here is 23 years, people were affected today. But living in the United States all this time with fear and uncertainty. We can fix that, and that's what I'm going to do today. Fix it. Here's the point. It doesn't require any fundamental change in our immigration law. There's already a system in place for people we're talking about today. But the process is cumbersome, risky, and it separates families. Under the current process, undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens must go back to their home country, for example, to Mexico, to fill out paperwork and obtain long-term legal status. They have to leave their families in America with no assurance that they'll be allowed back in the United States. So they stay in America, but in the shadows, living in constant fear of deportation without the ability to legally work. All this, even though under the law today, they are eligible for long-term legal status. Today, I'm announcing a common-sense fix to streamline the process for obtaining legal status for immigrants married, to American citizens who lived here for a long time. For those wives or husbands and their children who have lived in America for a decade or more but are undocumented, this action will allow them to file the paperwork for legal status in the United States, allow them to work while they remain with their families in the United States. Let's be clear, this action still requires undocumented spouses to file all required legal paperwork to remain in the United States. It requires them to pass the criminal background checks, and it doesn't apply to anyone trying to come here today. It only applies, this action is a better way. It doesn't tear families apart while requiring every undocumented spouse to fulfill their obligations under the law. Look, the action I'm announcing today will go into effect later this summer. And by the way, just as was true for the protection of dreamers, the steps I'm taking today are overwhelmingly supported by the American people, no matter what the other team says. In fact, polls show over 70% of Americans support this effort to keep families together.
President Biden at the White House today. The White House estimating that the action to provide legal status and protections for the spouses of U.S. citizens would be about 500,000 spouses, plus another 50,000 or so non-citizen children of immigrants under the age of 21 whose parent is married to a U.S. citizen. On Capitol Hill, reaction from Republican Senators John Barrasso of Wyoming and Joni Ernst of Iowa.
This Biden administration and the Democrats have let 10 million illegal immigrants into our country. 10 million. Common sense will tell you that among them are additional terrorists, and Democrats have no plan to keep us safe. Last week, Joe Biden had an executive order, a feeble executive order, too little, too late. And today at the White House, Joe Biden is going to be down there with another order, which is going to provide amnesty for another 500,000 illegal immigrants. Our country is being invaded by illegal immigrants, and in this Senate, Democrats are repeatedly voting to continue this. The American people want secure borders. We want to know who's coming here. Republicans have solutions. It's finish the wall. It's stop, catch, and release, and bring back a policy that works. And that policy is called Remain in Mexico.
And I'm going to keep piling on where he left off. So, yes, once again, President Biden has rolled out the red carpet for illegal migrants. So we're hearing the doublespeak again. Out of one side of his mouth, he's saying, look at me, I'm doing an executive order. We're going to control the border. And then on the other hand now, he's offering basically mass amnesty to hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants that are currently within the country. So who's listening to this doublespeak? Well, I can tell you it's our adversaries. It's terrorist organizations, and most certainly it's the cartels. So let's just look at where we are since the executive order nearly 2 weeks ago. 2,700 illegal crossings just in the San Diego sector. Just as Senator Barrasso said, we had 8 illegals in the United States that were caught that have links to ISIS, a terrorist organization. And just most recently, we saw the horrific rape and murder of a mother of 5 by an illegal immigrant. When and where does it stop? Joe Biden, this is on you. We need to secure our border.
Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, and before that, Republican John Barrasso of Wyoming, 2 members of the Senate Republican leadership team at a news conference today in the U.S. Capitol building. Story from The Hill: an ongoing immigration surge could reduce the nation's deficits by almost $1 trillion over the next 10 years, the Congressional Budget Office said Tuesday in its latest projections. The estimate is based on the assessment that about half of immigrants in the surge will be authorized for work and will be as likely to pay taxes on their income as the rest of the population. And immigrants who work without authorization will pay some taxes, but are considered less likely to do so than the rest of the population. That story from The Hill. U.S. lawmakers, Rights Associated Press, pressed Boeing's chief executive Tuesday about the company's plans to fix its manufacturing problems and its willingness to heed whistleblowers' warnings, while relatives of the people who died in 2 crashes of Boeing 737 MAX jetliners were in the room to remind him of what was at stake. CEO David Calhoun appeared before the Senate Investigations Subcommittee, chaired by Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, a Boeing critic. Blumenthal opened the hearing by recognizing the relatives of the crash victims and the family of a Boeing whistleblower who died by suicide earlier this year. The senator said the hearing is a moment of reckoning. It's about a company, a once iconic company, that somehow lost its way. Calhoun's appearance before Congress was the first by a high-ranking Boeing official since a panel blew out of a 737 MAX during an Alaska Airlines flight in January. No one was seriously injured in the accident, but it raised fresh concerns about the company's best-selling commercial aircraft. That was from Associated Press. David Calhoun, in his opening statement, turned to the families in the audience, the victims of the crashes, and apologized.
Before I begin my opening remarks, I would like to speak directly to those who lost loved ones on Lion Air Flight 610 and the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. I would like to apologize on behalf of all of our Boeing associates spread throughout the world, past and present, for your losses. I apologize for the grief that we have caused. And I want you to know we are totally committed to your memory. The work and focus on safety for as long as we're I'm sorry.
Boeing CEO David Calhoun at the Senate Homeland Security Committee's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. A little tough to hear because he got up from his seat, turned away from the microphone. He said in part, "I apologize for the grief that we have caused, and I want you to know that we are totally committed in their memory to work and focus on safety for as long as we are employed by Boeing." A Politico article reads, "A chorus of voices, cracking and trembling, were heard shouting, 'We want to know how they died and how you, Boeing, and the CEO let that happen.'" And the article continues, "Then Calhoun encountered a Senate panel whose chair was in a less than forgiving mood and who offered fresh whistleblower allegations that the company was knowingly hiding its problems from regulators." That chair, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut.
Let me ask you, Mr. Calhoun, have you heard that non-conforming parts are installed in any Boeing airplanes?
We have a process, Senator, to ensure that no non-conforming part is
But
in an
2
airplane.
whistleblowers have told us that likely non-conforming, meaning damaged or defective parts, were installed. And at the very least, they were hidden from the FAA.
Senator, I read that complaint this morning. I do know and had followed up that the speak up had been received in our system and that the quality team has been and is looking. So more than happy to get back to you on that. I apologize. I'm personally not involved in it. I just saw it this morning.
I would hope that you would. You don't know of a single instance of any discipline for retaliation. Is that correct? That's what you said earlier.
I said that we have taken action on people who we have determined to have retaliated, but I did not have the number.
Can you tell me about one?
I'm not going to tell you about one, sir. We have a process. It works.
Well, I beg to differ. It's not working.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not working. You know it's not working.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, chair of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, questioning Boeing CEO David Calhoun. Another member of the subcommittee, Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, asked the CEO about safety and his compensation package.
What is it that you get paid currently?
Senator, that's well disclosed in our proxy documents in each of the years that I've been employed.
Yeah, but what is it?
It's a big number, sir.
Well, let me help you out. It's $32.8 million this year. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does.
That's a 45% increase over last year. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does.
What is it you get paid to do exactly?
I get paid to run the Boeing company.
Yeah. So just help me understand that. I mean, do you get paid for transparency? Is that one of the metrics for your income?
I think the board counts on me for transparency.
Really? Because you're under investigation for falsifying 787 inspection records. The Boeing's under criminal investigation for the Alaska Airlines flight. You were investigated by DOJ for criminal conspiracy to defraud the FAA. This is all in your tenure. This doesn't sound like a lot of transparency to me. What about safety? Is that a component of your salary?
It sure is, Senator.
You know, have you seen the reports that the subcontractor that you used to make that door piece that fell out of the sky, that when the FAA went and toured the facility, they found one door seal being lubricated with Dawn liquid dish soap and cleaned with a wet cheesecloth, and another was being checked with a hotel room key card. Does that sound like safety to you?
Senator, I think our relationship with that particular supplier has been well documented, reviewed by the FAA, and most certainly us. And I'm very intent on acquiring that company so that none of that ever happens.
You know, the FAA also says that Boeing still has not implemented the recommended steps back from 2019 and 2020 after the MAX crashes. You still have not taken the appropriate safety procedures or implemented what they recommended. I mean, how, if safety is a component of your $33 million compensation package, I mean, how can you possibly qualify for any of this? What about quality? Is quality part of your compensation package?
Senator, I meet with the FAA pretty regularly. They don't hold anything back, and I'm not aware of anything that has been cited with respect to those accidents that we haven't taken action on.
Really? Because we've had whistleblowers. You said you'd listen to whistleblower testimony. We've had multiple whistleblowers come before this committee and allege that Boeing is cutting every possible corner on quality and safety, not just in the past, but now. They've alleged that you've eliminated safety inspections, that there are fewer in quality and there are fewer inspectors doing quality inspections out there. They've alleged that when they raised quality issues and concerns, they were reassigned, they were retaliated against, they were physically threatened. That doesn't sound like attention to quality to me. And yet you're getting paid $33 million a year. It's extraordinary.
Senator, we have increased our quality inspectors significantly.
Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, questioning Boeing CEO David Calhoun at today's subcommittee hearing. David Calhoun has announced that he will be stepping down from his position at the end of the year. From CBS News, Senate Democrats on Tuesday will try to pass legislation that would restore a Trump-era ban on bump stocks, an accessory that enables semi-automatic weapons to shoot at a very rapid pace, after last week's Supreme Court decision striking down the ban. One Republican, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, has signed on as a co-sponsor of the bump stock legislation. Senator Jackie Rosen, Democrat from Nevada, urged Republicans to let this bill pass.
I want to quickly address the Supreme Court's recent decision on bump stocks. My community, my city, my state were forever changed on 1 October, and saying that banning bump stocks solves a fake problem. It's disgraceful and it's offensive. We lost Nevadans that day. 60 people were killed in the largest mass shooting in American history. Families were torn apart. For us, the carnage created by bump stocks is very real. So shame on anyone who says it's a fake problem. The Trump-era ban was common sense, and it saved lives. We now have a responsibility to make it permanent in federal law, and I call on all of my colleagues to let this legislation move forward today.
Senator Jackie Rosen, Democrat from Nevada, at a news conference. That Trump-era ban she referred to as a ban that went into effect in 2019 after a gunman who used a semi-automatic rifle equipped with the bump stock accessories killed 60 people at a Las Vegas music festival, one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history. And again, from the CBS News article, the Supreme Court's conservative justices found that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives overstepped its authority in prohibiting the devices, concluding that a semi-automatic rifle outfitted with bump stock is not the same as a machine gun, because the trigger still must be released and re-engaged to fire each shot. Machine guns, which are banned under federal law, can fire continuously by a single pull of the trigger. That was from CBS News. Well, after Senator Rosen made her remarks later in the day on the Senate floor, Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat from New Mexico, did ask unanimous consent to bring up and pass a bill to ban bump stocks. Unanimous consent requires that all senators agree, and Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska, objected.
The Supreme Court made a decision last week that he didn't like. A 6-3 majority of the Supreme Court ruled the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives overstepped their authority when they tried to reclassify bump stocks as machine guns. The Supreme Court made the right decision. In January, I joined Senator Lummis and other colleagues in filing an amicus brief urging the Supreme Court to do what they did. But the majority leader and his Democrat colleagues supported the gun-grabbing overreach. So the majority leader has decided to bring up a bill called the Bump Act. He claims this bill will ban bump stocks. But just like his previously misnamed bills, if you actually read the bill, that's not what it does at all. The Bump Act targets common firearm accessories, not just bump stocks. This is from the text of the bill. The bill bans any manual, power-driven, or electronic device primarily designed or redesigned so that when the device is attached to a semi-automatic firearm, the device materially increases the rate of fire of the firearm. In short, this doesn't ban bump stocks. This bill would ban literally any item that makes a firearm easier and in some cases safer to shoot. We're talking about competition or adjustable triggers. We're also talking about items that reduce the distance between a shooter's hand and the trigger, like certain firearm stocks or grips. Again, it's not just about bump stocks. That's why disabled veterans hate this bill. I've heard about veterans in Nebraska who are concerned about this bill. Sometimes veterans who are disabled or elderly choose to adjust the stock or grip on a firearm to make it easier and safer to shoot. The Constitution protects their right to do so, that through the Second Amendment. This bill would take that constitutional right away from the same men and women who fought for our Constitution.
Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska, on the Senate floor. He later objected to the unanimous consent request from Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat from New Mexico, to pass a bill brought up by the Senate Democratic majority to ban bump stocks. This is Washington Today. The Senate Finance Committee held a hearing today about updating the Social Security Administration's disability programs. Committee Chair Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, said in his opening statement, unfortunately, the current rules at Social Security make working with a disability the bureaucratic equivalent of running a marathon. Many of those who try to work get an overpayment from Social Security due to the outdated rules. An overpayment isn't like winning the lottery. These benefits are going to essentials like groceries, gas, and rent until recent action by Commissioner O'Malley. Once Social Security realized it made an overpayment, it demanded all the money back at once. These overpayment fines can run into the tens of thousands of dollars, which these Americans simply cannot afford to pay. That was part of the opening statement from Senator Ron Wyden. He then asked one of the witnesses, Aaron Gotland from the Government Accountability Office, GAO, who told the story about one recipient facing a very large overpayment notice.
Let me start with you, Ms. Gotland. You got my attention when you mentioned a $28,000 overpayment. And I'm sure that comes to the individual out of nowhere. And I gathered that this Ticket to Work program sounds fine as a concept, but in actuality, there are a lot of stop signs along the way to getting to work. And that's what I want to go over with you. So these individuals are trying to balance health care and food and rent, and then all of a sudden they get this letter from Social Security. And it says, as you indicated, you owe thousands and thousands of dollars. This upends a person's life. And I'd like to know, how do they fight back in an instance like that? Because you got to get through to a caseworker. They seem to be overworked. Often you have to talk to a lawyer. That costs too much. And it seems like it's going to take a lot of time, which you don't have if you're going to kind of extricate yourself from this kind of bureaucratic glue. So where do they turn? I mean, how do they beat this? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Chairman Wyden, for that question. So it is a very complicated process, as we understand it, for beneficiaries to, as you say, fight back with the overpayments. And there's a waiver process that people can engage in with the agency where they apply if, for example, they believe that the overpayment is unfair. And that is...
How long does that usually take?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information. In fact, GAO has not conducted a review of that end process in several years.
Could you get back to us and even give us some information from a handful of cases?
Absolutely.
Certainly, I'd like to know how that works.
Yes, and we get constituent calls, as do you, I'm sure, on a regular basis of people who are not only upset by the overpayment notice, but also overwhelmed and confused by the process. And it's something that GAO thinks would be beneficial for us to conduct some oversight and look into this process.
If you wanted to use this waiver, is that one of the things you have to go out and get the lawyer that you can't afford to help with?
Yes, it's certainly advantageous to have that kind of legal support.
Eric Gotland, Government Accountability Office, Education, Workforce, and Income Security Assistant Director, testifying before the Senate Finance Committee. The questions coming from the chair, Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon. The Social Security Administration has a summary at their website of the disability program for 2022, data released October 2023. Disability benefits were paid to over 8.9 million people. Awards to disabled workers accounted for 89% of awards to all disabled beneficiaries, and of those, average monthly benefit received was $1,483.10. Wall Street today, the Dow up 56, NASDAQ up 5, S&P up 13. Washington today continues in a moment.
C-SPANshop.org is C-SPAN's online store. Browse through our latest collection of C-SPAN products, apparel, books, home decor, and accessories. There's something for every C-SPAN fan, and every purchase helps support our nonprofit operations. Shop now or anytime at cspanshop.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. It's free and wherever you find your podcasts. From Reuters, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday said that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had assured him that the Biden administration was working to cancel restrictions on arms deliveries to Israel. Blinken, asked at a news conference in Washington about Netanyahu's remarks, declined to say whether he had given the Israeli leader such assurances, but said U.S. administration was still reviewing one shipment of large bombs for Israel over concerns about their use in densely populated areas. That was the reporting from Reuters. First, here is Prime Minister Netanyahu's posted video.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posting that video on X. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked about it at a joint news conference in Washington, D.C. with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
Mr. Secretary, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted about an hour ago, conveniently timed for this press conference, a video talking about U.S. pause on some weapons to Israel, and said you assured him last week that U.S. is working to remove those bottlenecks. Is this an accurate characterization of what you told him? If not, what did you tell him? Will the U.S. remove its holds on these bombs? And finally, have the ceasefire negotiators made any progress since last week? Are you more or less optimistic today about the prospects of a deal?
It's very important to remember that our security relationship with Israel goes well beyond Gaza. Israel is facing a multiplicity of threats and challenges, including in the north from Hezbollah, from Iran, from the Houthis in the Red Sea, from various groups that are aligned against Israel and in many cases beholden to Iran. So the President's been very clear from day one that he will do everything he can to make sure that Israel has what it needs to effectively defend itself against these threats. And a big part of that as well is making sure that in providing that assistance to Israel, it has a strong deterrent, which is the best way to avoid more conflict, to avoid more war, to avoid what we're already seeing in Gaza spreading to other areas, to other fronts. That's been one of our objectives from day one. So we're committed to that. We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that President Biden has talked about with regard to 2,000-pound bombs because of our concerns about their use in a densely populated area like Rafah. That remains under review. But everything else is moving as it normally would move. And again, with the perspective of making sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against this multiplicity of challenges. With regard to the ceasefire negotiations, and you heard me talk about this at length during our trip, I'll just remind everyone once again that the entire world came together behind the proposal that President Biden laid out a few weeks ago. The entire world with one exception, and that was Hamas. Hamas came back with, after everyone else had said yes, including Israel, reconfirmed to me by Prime Minister Netanyahu when I was in Israel. Hamas came back with new conditions, new demands, including demands and conditions that actually went beyond what it had already previously accepted. So we're working to see if we can bridge the gaps that Hamas has now created by not saying yes to the proposal that everyone else had agreed to, that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, countries around the world. And we have the negotiators, the mediators, Egypt, Qatar in particular, working on this to see if we can bridge the gap. As I've said before, and I'll repeat again based on what we've seen in recent days, I believe that the gaps are bridgeable, but that doesn't mean they will be bridged because ultimately Hamas has to decide. And it could decide again to continue to move the goalposts, to move the line out. If it continues to do that, the net result will be that people will continue to suffer horrifically every single day. And you have to question whether one individual living, we believe, hundreds of feet underground, relatively safe, is putting his own interests and his own views ahead of the interests, the needs of the people that he purports to represent. There could be a ceasefire right now if they had said yes a week ago. So we'll continue to work this with urgency, with determination, to see if we can bridge the gap. But I can't tell you with conviction that we will because, again, you have Hamas that continues to move the line.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a State Department news conference with visiting NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Another Reuters article, NATO is concerned about support Russia could provide for North Korea's missile and nuclear programs. The alliance's head set on Tuesday as Russian President Vladimir Putin headed to the reclusive nuclear-armed country for the first time in 24 years. Putin vowed on Tuesday to deepen trade and security ties with North Korea and to support it against the United States. His state visit comes amid U.S. accusations that North Korea has supplied dozens of ballistic missiles and over 11,000 containers of munitions to Russia for use in Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told a joint press conference after meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Russia's war in Ukraine was being propped up by China, North Korea, and Iran, who all wanted to see the Western alliance fail. That was the story from Reuters. Here is Secretary Stoltenberg at the news conference in Washington.
Putin's visits to North Korea demonstrates and confirms the very close alignment between Russia and authoritarian states like North Korea, but also China and Iran. And this also demonstrates that our security is not regional, it's global. What happens in Europe matters for Asia, and what happens in Asia matters for us. And this is clearly demonstrated in Ukraine, where Iran, North Korea, China are propping up, fueling Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. So this idea that we can divide security into regional theaters doesn't work anymore. Everything is intertwined, and therefore we need to address these challenges together. We are of course also concerned about the potential support that Russia provides to North Korea when it comes to supporting their missile and nuclear programs. We see how much military support Russia gets from North Korea, but also from Iran, and how China is propping up their war economy. And this is also one of the reasons why at NATO and at the NATO summit here in Washington next month, we will further strengthen our partnership with our partners in the Asia-Pacific region, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan, also to address the fact that the challenges they see, we see in Asia and Asia-Pacific are directly linked to the challenges we face in Europe. And let me also say that I also fully agree that China cannot have it both ways. They cannot continue to have normal trade relationships with countries in Europe and at the same time fuel the biggest war we have seen in Europe since the Second World War. So at some stage this has to have consequences for China.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at a joint news conference with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington. Some notes from Associated Press. In the North Korean capital Pyongyang, the streets were decorated with Russian President Vladimir Putin's portraits and Russian flags. A banner hung on a building that said, "We warmly welcome the President of the Russian Federation." And also, South Korea's military said soldiers fired warning shots to repel North Korean soldiers who temporarily crossed the land border Tuesday for the second time this month. The South's military said North Korea had been increasing construction activity in frontline border areas, such as installing suspected anti-tank barriers, reinforcing roads, and planting landmines. Another Reuters article, the chair of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee said on Tuesday that U.S. intelligence agencies need to do a better job in tracking Chinese advanced technology and other efforts across a variety of fields. Senator Mark Warner spoke to reporters at a breakfast sponsored by the Christian Science Monitor.
Our intel community is so used to traditionally spying on, you spy on the military, you spy on the government. You don't necessarily follow all of the, all the tech companies, or you don't follow where China's getting extraction of rare earth minerals, or you don't follow what, in the life sciences area, BGI, the Chinese company may end up becoming, the next potential Huawei. You'd think, as somebody who claims, a la Al Gore, that I invented cell phones, that I could figure out how to turn mine off. But the case in point I'm talking about is, I think we, in our intel side, have missed a couple of times, like SMIC's ability to get chips under 7 nanometers, some of the efforts of tool makers. We just need to kind of continue to up our game in following what China is doing, not just in this chip space, but frankly in a lot of these other domains where we've seen no indication that China is not, pedal to the metal in terms of investing and trying again to not just be successful, but dominate some of these domains.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, chair of the Intelligence Committee, part of a breakfast with reporters hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. He was also asked about whether he planned to run for re-election in 2026. He said he would talk about that after this November's general election, and what he thought of Republican Governor of Virginia Glenn Youngkin possibly running against him. He said he knows the governor socially and is working with him on various public policy issues, and the two have not talked about their future political plans. Story from CNBC. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are scrambling to address the boom in deep-fake artificial intelligence pornographic images, which have targeted everyone from celebrities to high school students. Now a new bill will seek to hold social media companies accountable for policing and removing deep-fake porn images published on their sites. The measure would criminalize publishing or threatening to publish deep-fake porn. That was from CNBC. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, is the bill's sponsor, and he held a news conference today in Washington.
Our bill, the Take It Down Act, will protect and empower victims of non-consensual intimate imagery, also known as NCII, by criminalizing its publication, making it unlawful for a person to knowingly put such content on social media or other platforms. This includes both real and computer-generated sexual images that depict real identifiable people. There are a few bills in the Senate right now that are working to tackle this issue. And I want to be clear. Our legislation is designed to be complementary to those efforts. I'm supportive of the other efforts, and this is designed to fill gaps that the other bills do not address. As the ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, my legislation is the first of its kind to require websites, including social media sites, to have in place a process to remove such content within 48 hours of a request from a victim. The sites must also remove any copies of those images. It can be maddening dealing with big tech and trying to get these images, these fake images of your child, taken down. And big tech over and over again has demonstrated an arrogance, an imperiousness, a lack of accountability. We're all aware that this happened to Taylor Swift. And if you happen to be a global pop star, you can get the images pulled down. When Taylor Swift rightly said these images are disgusting, pull them down, big tech responded. But if you're not fortunate enough to be a global celebrity, if you're just a teenager living in Texas or New Jersey or anywhere else, big tech ignores your pleas for help.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at a news conference on Capitol Hill, along with other Senate sponsors of this bill, and joined by victims of deepfake pornography, including some high school students. Senator Cruz referred to other bills on this subject, returning to the CNBC article. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, introduced a bipartisan bill early this year that would allow victims of non-consensual deepfakes to sue people who had held, created, possessed, or distributed the image. When Senator Durbin tried to get a floor vote of his bill last week, Senator Cynthia Lummis, Republican from Wyoming, blocked the bill, saying it was overly broad in scope and could stifle American technological innovation. Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington has a story. George R. Nethercutt Jr., the Spokane lawyer and county Republican chairman who became a national political giant killer 30 years ago by defeating the sitting Speaker of the House of Representatives, died Friday morning. He was 79 and had fought the debilitating effects of a progressive neurological disease for several years. After beating Speaker of the House Tom Foley in 1994 as one of the stars of a GOP revolution, Nethercutt went on to serve 10 years in the House before an unsuccessful run for U.S. Senate. He later set up a foundation to inspire a new generation with an appreciation for civics and government service. That story from the Spokesman Review in Washington State. George Nethercutt was on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program in early January 1995, just a few days after he was sworn in, and he talked about meeting Tom Foley during freshman orientation.
A quote from the article, again referring to you, George Nethercutt, that Mr. Foley told the freshman Republicans that he envied them in their first term of Congress when simply walking onto the floor would be a thrill. Mr. Nethercutt said he remembered that conversation when he entered the House and had that feeling on Wednesday.
Very true. I was struck by the history of the moment. I was struck by what Mr. Foley had said to me in a private lunch a couple of weeks ago. He was very gracious and very I think, are respectful of the institution of Congress, of any of the people who were defeated. I certainly rank him very high, and as a very dignified person, a high-quality person, very, very much of a gentleman. And so I said, you know, as he conceded and I, you know, claimed victory after the election, I said, you know, I feel badly that both of us can't win because he is a gentleman, although I'm glad I did, and I think there are substantive reasons why I did, but I mean, I'm not unfeeling for his feelings, and he did have this great respect for the institution, yes, and I think a lot of us feel the same way, have this great sense of the history of the place, and the people change, but the place stays a lot the same.
Congressman George Nethercutt, Republican from Washington State, on C-SPAN in January 1995, soon after he took office. From C-SPAN's video library, George Nethercutt has died at the age of 79. His victory over then House Speaker Tom Foley, Democrat of Washington State, was the first time a House Speaker lost a re-election since 1860. And as the Washington Post writes, it was part of a stunning GOP wave that shifted national politics to the right in 1994. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.